What's that? You want to be scared? Come with me. You will experience tales of horror, ghosts, and death. It is not recommended for the weak at heart. Listen in the dark. It's more fun that way. This is Weekly Spooky.
Hello, my friends. It's Wednesday. And you know what that means, don't you? It's time for a little spooky in your weekly. I'm your host and narrator, Henrik Kuto, and tonight's story is all about love and vampires. So you know a story like this is gonna have some bite. But before we get to that, I want to take a moment to say thank you so much for listening to the show. We're very excited to enter into the Halloween season because that's the bread and butter of our program. That's when everybody likes to get a little spooky. But you listening right now in August, you love to be spooky all year round. You're my kind of people, and I want to thank you sincerely. I also want to remind you to make sure you're subscribed on your favorite podcast app. And while you have your podcast app opened, why not drop us a 5-star rating, whether it's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or somewhere I don't even know about. It helps bring new listeners to the show, and it doesn't cost you a penny. And speaking of, if you want to support us directly, you can go to the brand new WeeklySpooky.com and click on Patreon. For as little as $1 a month, you help the show continue to go on and on and on, and you get an exclusive scary story every single month, as well as the great joy of knowing you keep the show going. But I'm sorry, my friends, I have to skedaddle because you see, my shift is about to start. I work the aptly titled graveyard shift at this convenience store. And I think tonight might be a little bit different than normal. So get comfortable, turn off the lights. Your shift of terror is about to begin. Right after a quick word from our sponsors. Convenience Store Vampire by Douglas Waltz. After high school, I bummed around for the summer until I realized that being an adult meant having a job of some sort. Gas and food weren't going to pay for themselves. I was lucky that my mom hadn't kicked me out of the house yet. I was driving down Center Avenue and passed a Stop and Go. Stop and Go was a chain of convenience stores that tried to compete with 7-Eleven. It felt like they were every 5 blocks. No matter where you went, there was another one. This one had one of those little help wanted signs in the giant windows in the front next to the beer and cigarette posters. I figured I had nothing left to lose, so I pulled into the little parking lot, got out of my car, and went inside. All Stop and Go stores were identical. If you'd seen Kevin Smith's movie Clerks, you have a pretty good idea of what I was looking at. The biggest difference was the space behind the counter was elevated by about a foot, so you always had to look down on the customers. No idea why. And behind the counter was one Janet Rigby, the manager of this particular Stop and Go. Janet's measurements were the same as any human beach ball. She had fashioned a chair from 2 milk crates wired together. A glance at the bottom of the milk crate told me that the constant pressure of Janet setting on it was going to cause a collapse soon. Now I knew I needed the job. How could I miss the day she went for a tumble? I know it was mean, but at the tender age of 18, stuff like this was funny. We chatted for a minute and she let me know it would be a night shift. But this particular Stop and Go didn't stay open 24 hours a day. It closed at 2 a.m. Sounded good to me, so I was glad to start work the next day. Training took about an hour. I learned the register and how to make money orders. Apparently, a lot of people needed money orders. I met the other employee, Kathy, who was cute, but always had that look in her eye that she wished she was somewhere else. Other than that, I was ready to go, and Janet and Kathy left me to my own devices. Center Avenue is actually a pretty busy street in Portage, but my shift started after 5, so I didn't get much of a rush. Just a few customers straggling in at various times of the night. I was so happy to see the huge stacks of VHS tapes for rent in a rack that was positioned by the door. There was a little TV mounted to the rack that had a built-in VCR, and it had a tape that played previews of what we had to rent. I asked Janet if I could pick some movies to put on the rack, and she showed me how to fill out the form for the guy who showed up every other week. Being a huge horror movie fan, it didn't take long for the racks to have a pretty decent selection of horror movies. When it was slow, I would take out the preview tape and put in one of the movies I picked and just stand there with a can of soda and watch a movie. To give you an idea of how slow it was, one time I watched an entire movie before I heard the doorbell ping as someone opened it. As far as jobs for 18-year-olds go, it was pretty nice. One night I was watching this movie called Track of the Moon Beast. It's about this guy who gets a piece of moon rock embedded in him, and he turns into a monster. The VHS cover is gorgeous, but the movie is kind of, well, less than stellar. As I was watching it, I felt the short hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I turned around, and a vision of loveliness was standing behind me. Tall and lanky with a shock of platinum blonde hair. Her face was made up with a thin layer of makeup, and ruby red lipstick made her lips even more pronounced than they already were. She had on a t-shirt with the cover from the Clash London Calling album on it, and denim shorts with big, black work boots. Rainbow suspenders made popular by Robin Williams on Mork and Mindy complemented the rest of the outfit, and when I jumped upon seeing her, she flashed a huge smile with white, pearly teeth. "Sorry, didn't mean it to scare you," she giggled when she said it. "No problem," I replied, trying to sound cool and failing miserably. "What you watching?" "Oh, this? Yeah, Track of the Moon Beast. Guy gets infected by a moonstone that turns him into a monster." "Oh, I've seen this." Then she continued to stare at the screen, watching the movie with me. After a minute, I decided to be brave and said, "You want a soda? I can get you one for free if you want." "No, thanks." She continued to watch the screen in fascination. I found myself looking at her more than the monster movie. It was as if I was trying to memorize her face. It was like looking at someone made of porcelain. She caught me looking once, smiled, and went back to watching the movie. When it was over, we were the only people in the place, and she stretched like a cat before walking down the aisles, not really looking for anything. "You like the movie?" she asked. "It was okay," I lied. To be honest, my focus was entirely on her. Then something slipped into my mind. I hadn't heard the bell that goes off when you open the door. I always heard the bell. My brain had trained itself like a Pavlovian response. How did she get inside the store? I turned to ask her and realized that I was alone in the store. Not only did she get in without triggering the bell, but she had left the same way. I checked the back room where we kept the bottle returns, and there was nothing there. I even went in the cooler, and nothing. Empty. I shrugged to no one and finished my closing duties and left for the night. After a week, I was still wrapped up in that girl. She was all I could think of. I came to work hoping that she would return, and nothing happened. For about 2 weeks, I was stocking the coolers with beer from the inside. We had a couple of rows of singles for people that couldn't afford a six-pack. Pretty sure we weren't supposed to do that, but the boss told me it would be fine. I could grab 6 long neck bottles in 2 hands, which made it go pretty fast. I learned to stack cans of beer along my arm, and it was about 6 cans. I was young and didn't want to actually do work, so I figured out the quickest way to do it. As I stood up with 6 cans of hams, a familiar face was outside the glass door of the cooler, smiling at me. I wasn't ready. I dropped all the cans. Luckily, only one of them spilt, and it whirled around the cooler, spraying hams everywhere. "Shit!" I exclaimed and went into cleanup mode. I needed some paper towels and the mop probably, so I stepped out of the cooler right into the girl, standing there, waiting for me. "I'm sorry," she said sheepishly. "It's okay," I stammered and cursed myself for it. I hadn't heard the bell again. That was even weirder because there was a bell in the cooler in case you were working and a customer came in. How the hell was she not setting off the goddamn bell? I went in the back for the mop and paper towels, and when I returned to the cooler, she was still there. "Let me help." She took the roll of paper towels and went into the cooler before I could say anything. I followed with the mop. We cleaned up the mess and I restocked the shelves. She stood there the whole time, watching me. "So, I never got your name the other night when we were watching the movie," she said quietly. "It's Arthur. What's yours?" "My name's Elizabeth." And she smiled that amazing smile again, and I could feel the blood rush into my head. She tilted her head and looked at me as if I was some new form of life, and then she slowly moved towards me and kissed me on the lips. I felt my entire body tingle with electricity and was amazed at how cold her lips were. Then I remembered we were in the cooler, and I kissed her back. After a few minutes of that, she gently pushed me away. I was amazed at how strong she was. "I have to go," she said, and walked out of the cooler. It took me a second to regain my bearings, and I followed her out. In that split second, I discovered I was again alone in the store. The bell broke my train of thought, and it was one of my regular customers, Old Man Johnson. He was the only reason we stocked hams. No one else ever bought a single can of that stuff, but Old Man Johnson would buy a case every 3 days or so, without fail. We chatted for a bit like we always did. He asked me if House by the Cemetery was worth a rental, and I told him it was, so he got that with his beer and headed out the store. 2 weeks went by before I saw Elizabeth again. This time I was just hanging out at the counter, so she had no way of sneaking up on me. I had been counting packs of cigarettes as one of my nightly duties and was looking down, but something triggered my peripheral vision, and I saw her approach the counter. After that, it was always a couple of weeks, and we talked, watched movies, and kissed sometimes. Then one day I came into work, and Janet was staring at me. "Arthur, come with me," she said in a serious tone, and I followed her to the back room. There was a door that I had never even seen before, and she fished a key from her smock and opened it. The room was dark except for 4 monitors that showed various areas of the store. I knew we had security cameras, but I didn't know this room in here was what it fed into. "Cool room, boss." Janet grunted and then messed with the control panel. The next thing I saw was me at the counter. No one else in the store. But I was talking to someone. I was just flipping through various time codes on the monitors when I spotted this. "Arthur, who are you talking to here?" I was grateful that the cameras were video only, no audio. I was also glad that she hadn't come across one where Elizabeth and I were kissing. I was just bored and messing around." I leaned closer to the monitor, and Janet watched me look at the screen. "Man, it does look like I'm talking to someone. Looks really good. Maybe I should be an actor or something." I gave a nervous laugh. Janet nodded, and then she laughed her big, booming laugh. "I figured as much. You're a good kid, Arthur, and you don't steal from the store, except for the occasional can of pop." She looked at the watch that barely fit around her huge wrist. "Well, Time for you to go to work and time for me to get the hell out of here. Let's go." She ushered me out of the room and back to my shift. That night, I located the 4 cameras and tried to find a dead spot, a place where none of them could see me if Elizabeth returned. As I was running the math through my mind, I found it odd that the fact that she didn't register on the camera was the least of my concerns. With each meeting, all I knew is that I would count the days until she returned. It was all I wanted. I got my wish a few days later, but it came at a terrible price. I was sweeping the floors when I saw her come through the door. Again, no bell. She saw me and waved, and I continued to sweep the floor so I could lead her to the dead spot by the giant display of 2-liter soda bottles in the back corner of the store. She came up and hugged me, and we kissed. Then I heard the bell. A guy came in, and his wide eyes darted everywhere. He seemed confused that there was no one manning the counter. I spoke up and walked to my post behind the counter. As I was about to ask how I could help him, the gun came out. Every pore of my body released all the sweat that had been lying beneath the surface. All I could see was that gun, and I was amazed at how huge it was. He shouted at me to give him the money from the register. My hands felt like they belonged to someone else as I fumbled with the keys to open it. He shouted at me to move it or he was going to shoot me, and I got it open and put the meager stack of bills in a bag for him. He didn't ask for a bag, but I did it anyway. As I went to hand him the bag, I saw Elizabeth behind him. She appeared as if by magic, and her mouth had opened to an impossible degree. And all I could see was the huge, sharp fangs. As they plunged into the guy's neck, he twitched and fired at me point blank. I could feel a white-hot pain lance through my chest, and I knew I was done for. Everything went dark. And then I woke up screaming, sitting up immediately. I looked at my chest, and while the shirt was bloody, there was no hole. Nothing. And there was the porcelain-smooth, beautiful face of Elizabeth. She was stroking my hair and smiling at me. Then she explained everything. When the man shot me, she knew that she could never lose someone who had been so sweet to her. Someone who just wanted to be with her. She told me she was a vampire and had used her powers to turn me into a vampire before I had bled out and died. I asked about the guy with the gun, and she just blew it off and shushed me as she continued to stroke my hair. Then she told me the rules of vampirism. A lot of them were what you would expect, but some movies just got it all wrong. Garlic, for instance, and we could eat food if we wanted. I looked at all the blood in the store, and when I suggested we clean it up, she shook her head. Dawn was approaching, and that thing about sunlight was totally true. I grabbed a piece of paper from the back counter and a pen, and in huge letters I wrote, "I quit." Elizabeth and I stepped out into the night and into an eternity of never-ending love. Oh, my friends, that one checked all the boxes if you ask me. It even had a pretty happy ending, depending on how you look at it, depending on what side you're on. I want to say a big thank you to my good pal Doug Waltz for the wonderful story about love and, well, the undead. I hope you're doing very well, and I hope you enjoyed your little dose of spooky on the Weekly. I want to remind you, we have a brand new series running right here on WeeklySpooky called Terrifying and True. It's where we take a little bit of a departure and look into things that, well, might have actually happened, and it's guaranteed to help tingle your spine. And it's in addition to our every Wednesday scary story, so make sure you check it out. And oh, believe you me, in October, we're going to make sure you have all the spooky you could ever need. We'll have brand new content every Wednesday, every Monday, and of course, on Halloween Day. So make sure you stick around, and if you get a chance, go to WeeklySpooky.com and support us on Patreon to help us keep it going. Speaking of which, I want to say an extra special thank you to our Patreon podcast boosters, folks who pay just a little bit more to hear their names on the show. They are Christopher Sullivan, Brent McCullough, Gino Lyons, Steve King, Karen Weemet, Jack Kerr, Jeff and George Hilton, Craig Cohen, and Kevin Fry. You folks help us keep everything moving along, and believe you me, it's not lost on me. This is the 151st scary story we've thrown your way, and we have no intention of stopping. Well, my friends, it's time for me to depart. Until next week, you take care of yourself. And for myself, for our executive producer Rob Fields, our producer Dan Wilder, and our composer Ray Mattis, I will talk at you next week. So stay scared, my good friends.
Thank you for listening. Make sure to find your way back next week. But for now, you are safe. Trust me.